Hi, this is Goodfellas History, where we discuss current events and give a historical context to the relevance of the politics, the history, and the sociological changes that happen in our society. My name is Nick. I have a college degree in social sciences. I spent 6 years as a criminal justice corrections officer. I am deeply versed in history and politics, and I would love for you to enjoy the show with us, the fellas.
Hey, my name's Garrett. I have no formal education in when it comes to history or politics, but I'm very interested in it. I would say that I know a little about a lot of things, and so I'm hoping with this show, with the deep dives that we'll do, that I can learn a lot. Kind of my big motivation for doing this. I want to learn as much as I can, hear different perspectives, just further my own knowledge and to have fun with it, really.
Yeah, and I'm Davis. I also don't have any secondary education on these matters, but I am a person who has been involved in several activist groups, specifically Black Lives Matter, and I just care deeply about the issues and want to bring forward important topics and talk about what we can do to better situations or increase lefty goals. With the first topic of conversation, we're actually going to talk about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. As the ceasefire that was announced just ended with Israel firing tear gas into a crowd of worshippers, dispersing them. This is actually the exact same situation that happened with several other previous ceasefires, and I feel like we just need to find some better solutions to this now, as nothing seems to change on this constantly. What are you guys thinking on this?
Well, I think that it's pretty clear that the Israeli government right now, the coalition that's in power, is losing credibility. So Benjamin Netanyahu is still prime minister, but the Likud party right now, which is a far-right to right-centrist organization, has lost a lot of credibility over the last 7 years. And just so happens that 7 years ago, we had another conflict between Israel and Hamas, and the Palestinian people, of course, were caught in the crossfire. Well, I think what's really important to note is that there was a huge amount of pressure put on the Israeli government from all sectors of the globe, including the United States, which is kind of funny. That's not very common. But now that the ceasefire has basically ended, Israel's far-right organizations and institutions are probably not going to give any ground anytime in the future.
Yeah, it just seems like there's not only just like social indoctrination, but the government, like the Israeli government itself, is just so grounded in this conflict now, and just needs to kind of churn out anything they can to keep it going, to further it, or like further certain kind of right-wing goals on that.
Well, I think it's really important to note that the Israeli government has been dominated by the far right, arguably for around 40 years. A lot of people don't know that the left of Israel, like left centrists and leftists in general, were fairly dominant in Israeli politics up until the mid to late 1980s. And it just so happens that around this time, Israeli politics and media began to focus heavily on terrorism, anti-terrorist activity, and began to ramp up the security state of Israel, which of course led to further reprisals from Palestine because, they're getting further policed and losing more and more territory to the Israeli state. Mm-hmm. So, kind of feeds itself.
I couldn't agree more. It's actually really interesting to kind of look at a lot of this, because a lot of people have been saying this isn't really like provocation because it was just like tear gas and like crowd dispersals, but it almost reminds me of like kind of the Black Lives Matter movements here as well, where it's like constant kind of just pushing and pushing and pushing. So then when like actual antagonism happens, it kind of seems like they're at fault almost, which I've found very interesting.
So the reality is that this is far right reactionary mindsets. Funny enough, really aren't that different despite region and location. And I mean, I'll get into this a little bit later, but it's important to note that the Israeli IDF has a huge amount of influence in training and teaching U.S. police departments, particularly our SWAT teams, our domestic disturbance teams, or riot teams. And yes, you could see kind of a beginning, a bleeding over, if you will, of IDF philosophy and ideology permeating throughout a lot of U.S. Police departments, particularly in areas where there's a large minority population that is historically been discriminated against and over-policed. And you can even see the same rationales being used as to why, aka the Palestinians in Israel, and why black and brown people in our country are over-policed. It's that they're a threat, they're dangerous, from the humanitarian, we need to make these places safe for everybody, to the they need to be supervised because they are dangerous mentality.
Yeah, honestly, it's kind of just a shame to see this happening right now. It's tragic. There's the right word for it. It's very tragic to kind of see it, because I feel like a lot of just civilian lives are the ones getting kind of tossed up in all of this.
Children, a lot of children.
Children.
Which, you can justify that by saying, well, we're just going after Hamas, but I mean, when a lot of children get caught in the crossfire, if that's really your justification, I think that you need to go about it in a different way.
I agree with
the story that we're going with.
What's really unfortunate actually is because Hamas has actually used hospitals and schools in the past to store weapons as well, and so that's been used as a justification to then bomb or drone strike those areas. And so I'm that's so messed up to attack civilian centers basically.
Well, I think it's really important to note that after Israel bombed the Associated Press and the Al Jazeera building, that's not that long before the ceasefire was put into place. So Israel did a bad boy. They went too far, and they attacked the Associated Press, and the only people who cried tears about being called out for it were far-right wingers here, people Representative Cotton from, Kansas or Oklahoma? Tom Cotton.
Yeah, Tom Cotton.
Yeah, and the only thing they have was deranged conspiracy theories about how the Associated Press is somehow working with Hamas. So that was a major PR blow to Israel. So fortunately, fascists tend to not be the brightest bulbs, and so they always have a way of unmasking themselves in incredibly stupid ways. And so the Israeli government basically shat the bed, to put it bluntly. And so that's why the ceasefire was put into place. Now that the tear gas has been dispersed, it remains to be seen. But I think the Associated Press and various journalist organizations are probably not going to be too favorable to the Netanyahu government right now.
I agree on that. Do you think Hamas is going to have another provocation with Israel though over this?
Israel belching in the wind is enough for Hamas to do what they do. Here's the thing. Let's be really brutally honest. Hamas is by far and away one of the most repulsive institutions on the face of the planet.
Oh, absolutely. It's a terrorist organization.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of people involved in Hamas. And that's because Hamas has an infrastructure that is only rivaled by the fragments of what is a Palestinian state. So, coupled with the repulsive and disgusting elements, is also humanitarian work. They have a long history of being tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, which was a nationalist slash jihadist organization, but not the same as Al Qaeda, but but in kind of the same vein. And let's really be honest. I mean, unfortunately, right now in places like Gaza and in the West Bank, there's really not a lot that the Palestinians have available to them. And so Hamas has basically been allowed to be the de facto face of the Palestinian people just due to that. And so this has allowed the barbarization of the Palestinians to take place, at least when it comes to the perspectives of Western audiences.
Well, and I think what's very interesting about this, and this is kind of something like most far-right groups do anyways, which is also kind of interesting, but is that they'll attack like the media over it, but they'll also attack like education systems over it, and they're going to like change education like courses and everything to indoctrinize people. And I mean, that's a classic far-right kind of maneuver, but it's really interesting to kind of see it at play here because it shows now in Israeli like voting patterns even, or just like polling as well. It's kind of crazy to see how many like Israeli citizens don't even consider like Palestine like citizens eligible to vote and whatnot.
Well, what's equally amazing is the fact that Israel seems to constantly be attacking schools. Mm-hmm. Like schools and hospitals. Now, granted, we talked about the fact that Hamas has, historically speaking, tried to store weapons in these locations. But these are vital parts of infrastructure. I mean, you can't call yourself a modern state or have any kind of semblance of modernity if hospitals and schools aren't in existence in your community. This has been deliberate, and I honestly believe that these are deliberate attempts by the Israeli government to further destabilize the Palestinian people, because the more they're able to paint the Palestinians as just a bunch of crazed jihadists, the more they're able to win their arguments as to why they need to take over territories. I mean, it's the same thing that we saw with Native Americans here in the United States. The idea that we need to conquer them and then basically turn them into second-class citizens with a plot of land in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, like shepherded them like cattle even. It was brutal.
But I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, like, let's be really blunt here. States and empires have been doing this since the Bronze Age with peoples. It's just that due to technological advancements, the state element of this has had the monopoly of power and force, at least for the last last 3 centuries. I mean, let's really be honest, the Native Americans at their mightiest would not have been able to withstand the full might of the United States state apparatus, particularly after the Civil War. And it's not surprising that after the Civil War, the United States government began a major program of basically conquering and capturing Native American tribes in the territories. But I mean, I think we're getting a little off topic.
I agree a little bit.
But
it is interesting to see the similarity, so I get what you're saying on that.
Well, I mean, it's a mindset, right? So it gets back to the psychology of why they're doing what they're doing. And it also feeds into the psychology of the far right of Israel. So, I mean, I think that's one of the key reasons why. I mean, Israel's going to do everything in its power. The Israeli state. I'm not going to say Israelis. I'm going to say the Israel state is going to do everything in its power to further antagonize the situation. It's kind of like the kid that is, not touching you, but is trying to touch you. Is trying to get a reaction from the Palestinian people, and they've spent basically 2 weeks seeing their society being crushed once again, just after they've been able to recover. I mean, it's brutal, and tempers are going to be really flipping high within these communities. So yeah, I have no doubt that it's enough of a provocation for Hamas to do something, and then it'll just escalate again. Fortunately, like I said, this time around, I think the Israelis are not going to have the benefit of the doubt, because the bombing of the
is because I feel given the situation and whatnot, at this point we know the Israeli government, without kind of like a pushing outside factor, they're not really going to alter their course of action. And so I think when we look at both the bills being proposed in the Senate by Bernie and the bill actually that was almost copied and pasted and posted by AOC in the House, could, if we can get that passed through, that could really be kind of like a pushing factor because it's cutting out hundreds of millions of dollars going over to the Israeli weapon state.
And that's going to be the trick. Because, I mean, let's really be honest here. Israel is the power in this situation. And Israel has become the power in this situation largely due to the fact that Israel is a client state to the United States. If Israel became the 51st state of the United States, I believe it would receive more federal income than any other state in the nation. Mm-hmm. So let's think about this. The state of Israel is receiving more aid than a state like Idaho or Montana or Utah, Wyoming,
I think it's
Mississippi, Alabama. You know, these are states that vitally need infrastructure and investment, and they're not getting it. While the state of Israel is getting millions upon millions of dollars, billions of dollars in some cases, for their military infrastructure. And let's not even talk about the fact that there are probably bonds and other systems of finance that are being sent Israel's way via, less savory channels. Mm-hmm. Add on top of it, I mean, I'm pretty sure Israel gets a discount with the United States military-industrial complex.
Oh, they definitely do.
Add on top of it that the Iron Dome program, I'm pretty sure the U.S. taxpayer is paying somewhere around 30 to 40% of that bill. So if the United States were to basically cut funding for the Israeli military, which the Sanders AOC bills would do, that'd put a considerable burden on the state of Israel to either maintain its military apparatus that it has right now, or will force it to actually have to change its stance and its positions in the region.
Really positive is Biden actually has spoken positively about trying to create a ceasefire between the two. And so he's open and receptive to that, which I think is a really positive point in favor of having these bills pushed through as well.
Well, I think that, I mean, on all actuality, the only people who are going to cry tears about this are, once again, the far right in the United States. And once again, had Israel not bombed the AP building, I think there'd be some credibility. But when your leading spokespeople basically tries to say that there's somehow this secret agreement between the Associated Flippin' Press and Hamas, you're not going to be doing well. And it's only going to feed to their circles. And so, I think that if the Democrats play their cards right, which I hope they do, they'll be basically allowing the Republican Party to dig its own grave on this issue.
I agree. And I think it's very important for the U.S. to do this, though, just because the UN already disagrees with Israel on this. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of like the only person backing them up at this point. We just have such a huge military apparatus that us backing them up is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the U.S. military infrastructure around the world, I mean, we could talk about U.S. empire. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, Israel is a key client state in the U.S. empire. So there's no way the United States is going to allow Israel to be taken off the map.
Oh, yeah.
And there's no way the United States is going to let Tel Aviv fall to any, outside coup or threat. So the reality is the Palestinian people are not a threat to the state of Israel. They're not. They could be Hamas and other militant organizations could be a threat to the Israeli people. I mean, let's really be honest. Hamas is not hitting military convoys and military attack chopters. They're shooting hospitals. Mm-hmm. They're intentionally picking out civilians. And so, I would say that it'd be if the left in this country wants to be successful in this issue, we need to jettison any LARPy sensibilities of revolutionary freedom fighters. Hamas is not that.
Yeah, no, Hamas is not a friendly group in this situation.
Hamas has more in common with the black shirts and the brown shirts in Italy and Germany than they do any freedom fighters, or even the Viet Cong for that matter. So I think that that's a really important thing to do. To add on to that, I mean, the left in this country really needs to put pressure and build itself up so we can put pressure on politicians to pass legislation like this. Because let's really be honest, if the United States cuts military funding to Israel, the Israeli state's not going to collapse anytime soon. It still has an incredibly powerful military. It's not threatened. Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, in no way, shape, or form have any kind of military capability to take on Israel. The only state in the regions, or states in the regions, that are any kind of particular threat to Israel is maybe Turkey and Iran, one of whom is a U.S. ally, and the other one is an enemy for the world right now, unfortunately. But, I mean, I think it's really important to note that this is a net neutral bill that will actually be incredibly important in forcing Israel to actually change its political behavior, because Israel's been able to play an isolationist game in the region largely due to the fact that it's been given a blank check by the United States government for decades. Before then, they had to play politics. They had to work with the nations around them and in the region, and they had to take into consideration the actions of their state in relations to the Palestinians. Since the 1980s, once again, when Reagan kind of changed the game and basically gave a blank check to Israel, it's not surprising that the far right of Israel has basically become a monolith in Israeli politics.
Yeah.
So
Netanyahu, his popularity seems to be dropping quite a bit as well, from what I've noticed, and that's even including with the Israeli citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
Old face. Old face. He doesn't seem to be really resolving any issues. Let's add on top of the fact that Israel's economy has kind of stagnated. What's really funny is that, Israel as a nation, it's really strange that we really don't discuss it like we do other nations like Japan and Korea, and Germany and Italy. And it's largely due to the fact that I think most of the world particularly understands that as client states go, I mean, Israel is under the dictionary of client state. Like a picture of it is that. So the United States is largely propping up Israel and its economy and its military. There's many reasons for it. Once again, we want to have a military base in the region that's secure. More importantly, Israel's economy is not tied to the region itself. It's tied to Europe and Western trade for obvious reasons. But I think one of the main problems where Netanyahu is getting in trouble is, to the far right, he's not going far enough. And any leftists that exist in Israel aren't going to support Netanyahu.
Yeah,
he's made too many enemies. Right now, the problem, though, for the left is that it's very fractured. And that's largely... Oh, I think you went on mute, Davis.
I did go on mute. Sorry, my dog is giving me grief right now, of course.
That's a pupper. Well, I think that right now the left in Israel is divided. And that's a real problem. And it kind of sounds a little bit similar, right? Where we have an all-encompassing, powerful Netanyahu, who's very much like a Trump figure in Israeli politics. He talks tough and acts tough. But, I mean, he's in a very precarious situation. And unfortunately, it's not that I think that the center-left is going to oust him. It's that more radical, hardline right-wingers are probably going to try to oust him.
Which is unfortunate.
And, once again, these aren't the brightest bulbs. So the very same people who probably advised the attack on the AP office are probably the same idiots that are going to seize power. And unfortunately, the immediate effect of that is going to be just a detrimental blow to Palestinian people.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's one of the reasons why Netanyahu's not doing well right now. I mean, that's my pessimistic view. An optimistic view is that the Israelis are just sick and tired of the forever war that's happening, and they want a solution.
Really, what I'm hoping is the case. I'm super pessimistic about that, though. I really do feel that it's more of just he's not right enough.
I mean, it could be a mix of both. I mean, I think that I don't know if you guys saw that Abby Martin interview of Israelis on the streets.
Oh yeah. That was wild.
See, I don't know if how much of that is, what is socially acceptable to say out in public versus what you really think. Versus this is what they believe in. That's a hill they're going to die on. Mm-hmm. So,
my pessimistic view on that is just that when we've looked at polling as well, though, like many of the Israeli citizenry just does not view like Palestinians as like citizens. They view them as like second class groups, and so I'm pretty pessimistic in that front, but I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So talking about solutions, Garrett, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah. So I feel like when it comes to solutions to end the conflict, it's not talked about a whole lot, at least in the mainstream, from what I've noticed anyway. And so I want to just go over a few of those just real quick, and we can kind of talk about what we feel. So it seems like there's two main solutions, but I have three on here, and so we'll kind of go with like maybe the least popular to the most. Okay. But of course that just depends on the perspective. So there is a three-state solution, which basically it's an approach to peace by returning control of the West Bank to Jordan and control of the Gaza Strip to Egypt. Now, this happened before, and so it's kind of a return to that. I'll be honest, this seems like the least popular one for, obvious reasons. This kind of seems like a big blow to Palestine. Mm-hmm. The Jordan government is opposed to giving Palestinians in the West Bank Jordanian citizenship, but the country of Jordan would be like de facto Palestinian, and so I think there would just be conflict there. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of people are now just disillusioned with the whole, because the other two solutions are the one state and the two state, and so I think a lot of people are disillusioned by that, and so this is kind of, we can't have the one-state solution, we can't have the two-state solution, so why not the three-state solution? But, there really wasn't a whole lot of research as compared to the other two, and so, I would say that's the least popular. I could see many issues going on with it. What do you guys think about a three-state?
That one just sounds like it would create more conflict, honestly. It almost sounds like you're involving another party into this that is stated they're not interested. So that just makes it sound worse.
So the real problem with the three-state solution is the fact that the Palestinians of the West Bank and the Jordanians are made up of very different tribe groups. Mm-hmm. So the Jordanians are primarily ethnically Arab, and I believe they're predominantly Sunni, whereas the Palestinians are predominantly Sunni, but they're not. They speak Arabic, and they're ethnically Arabic to some extent, but are kind of their own group as well. Arguably, they probably have more in common with Egyptians, and it's just due to long-term socioeconomic history that would take years to discuss.
Yeah.
But that would be that's probably the biggest sticking point. For Egypt, it's a large group of people in Gaza that are underdeveloped, undereducated, lack of infrastructure, and Israel is not going to want that because Gaza is basically a back door to Israel. And let's say that Israel and Egypt begin to heat up in relations with one another. Gaza basically is an open door to the heartland of Israel. And basically air bases, military bases, anything of kind of military infrastructure will be put into Gaza. And there's a population of people that have a direct incentive to dislike Israel right now for some reason. So it definitely created a lot of tensions. And on top of it, there is the same socioeconomic tensions between Palestinians and Egyptians. These are different groups of people. And so it really will create it probably create more problems than solutions, which is unfortunate. Because, I mean, as a solution, it's really not a bad idea, but it will antagonize Israel, because let's understand, Israel's goal is to eliminate the West Bank and Gaza and turn it all into Israel with Israeli citizens, which is basically Jewish Israeli citizens that toe the party line of the state in these regions. That's what they want. They're willing to allow Gaza to be basically an open-air prison, but Israel wants the West Bank. They want to take over all that territory, and that's where a lot of the tension right now is. Gaza, unfortunately, is just a punching bag for Israel.
Yeah.
So,
Makes it even worse.
Yeah, I would say that, since a lot of Palestinians want to be internationally recognized in their own state, this is kind of giving a big middle finger to them. And so I don't think personally that that's a viable solution, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as something that people are kind of throwing out there. So we can move on to, let's go to the two-state solution. So I would say that this is probably the most popular, especially historically speaking. So obviously it's the idea of an independent state of Palestine and an independent state of Israel. A poll in 2009 showed that a two-state settlement was favorable by both Palestinians and Israelis, but it seems like that's kind of dwindled in recent years, and so a 2021 report found that Israelis throughout the political spectrum opposed the two-state solution. And so basically saying if the two-state solution were to be, a reality, it would need a lot of international support and guarantees for it to be peaceful. And so, yeah, like I said, there's been just many, efforts for a two-state solution, and, it's never been, finalized, there's never been, agreement. And so I think a lot of people are starting to lose faith in this type of solution, and we're starting to kind of go to more of the one state, which we'll get to. But Benjamin Netanyahu, which has declared that a Palestinian state would not be established during his administration, but has also opposed the one-state solution for the ongoing conflict as well. So it just seems like he's opposed to any freaking...
He's not here to present options.
Yeah,
so
that could be a possible reason why he's, not doing very well right now.
Let me be very blunt. Benjamin Netanyahu most likely is racist against Arab people, and sees the Palestinians as less than human. Just based off of some vague statements that he has said throughout his entire time of being in power. Unfortunately, here in the States, he's presented as like the Israeli Winston Churchill, which is pretty stupid if you think of it. You go 2 seconds in, Winston Churchill, despite many of his faults, at least was pragmatic. He actually wanted to resolve some things. I mean, he wasn't the greatest guy in the world. I'm not going to give him the humanitarian award anytime soon. But Benjamin Netanyahu is a fascist. There's no other way around it. He's not reactionary. He's not just conservative. He's a fascist. And he sees the Palestinians as a detriment to his idealized world. If the far right in Israel could, without any consequences from the world around, they would go in and basically destroy the Palestinians. Either kill or deport every single one of them, man, woman, and child, and just take over the territory. But the political backlash and consequences of that would be too severe. So basically they're trying to do it piecemeal. That's one of the reasons why the far right is resistant to the two-state solution. Once again, I'm hoping that this is an Achilles heel for the far right in Israel. Because, I mean, the reason why Benjamin Netanyahu is not popular right now is that there's no solution.
Yeah.
There's a solution right there that would give the Palestinians legitimacy, an opportunity to speak at the UN, the ability to form trade and formal trade alliances and treaties with the various neighbors around them. And there's the crux of the matter. If Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government was actually interested in resolving the problem, they would have done the two-state solution decades ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The real issue is if Palestine is given statehood, and the Palestinians are given statehood, every single time the Israeli government comes in to evict Palestinians from territory would be an invasion.
Yep.
And more importantly, if the Palestinians were able to open trade relations and formal relations with their neighbors around them, this could eventually lead to Palestinians developing once again as a community and a society, which could potentially threaten Israel's interests in the long run as well. To put it bluntly, Benjamin Netanyahu and the right-wing coalition that have power right now in Israel see the West Bank and Gaza as theirs. It's just right now they're having to buy time while the former occupants of those territories are being driven out.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the left in Israel really doesn't seem to have much of a voice. They might be supportive of a one-state or a two-state solution. And this would lead you guys to ask, well, why not the one-state solution? But we'll get to that when we get there.
Yeah.
I did want to make a quick point actually as well. Talking on this. This kind of reminds me almost of how the Trump administration started losing popularity because of how they treated vaccines, where it was just there was no options, there was only the problem, and it didn't seem like they were doing anything until popularity kind of dipped. So, maybe we can actually be more optimistic then.
Yeah, I feel like people want their leadership to be behind at least something. When you're not behind anything, or at least not what's right in front of you, it can be very frustrating.
I think this leads into another reason why Benjamin Netanyahu is losing popularity, is that. So in democracies, legitimacy comes from the people. And in order to get the people to come out to vote for you, and for your government to have that legitimacy, you have to do something to get them to want to give you that. And the Netanyahu regime, maybe some small level, some interests, powerful may they be in Israel, are being served by the evictions. The lay Israeli citizen is really not seeing any benefit from this. So, that's another reason why Benjamin Netanyahu is not doing too well. Yeah. And what's going to be really interesting to see is his polling after all of this, after everything is said and done, because if it continues to go down, that might actually be a very positive thing, because it might mean that the Israeli people are beginning to catch on to the BS.
Yeah, that's really what I want to see is some more polling numbers. I would love for that to come.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think it is, important to point out that with more and more Jewish settlements in the West Bank, a lot of people, this idea of the two-state solution seems kind of, almost not possible, but just very unviable. The more the time goes on, the more that those Jewish people are settled in there, and at a certain point, it's not like you can just kick them all out.
There's another word for those settlements. It starts with a C. They're colonies.
Yeah.
So Israel's colonizing the West Bank. They're not going to do that in Gaza because Gaza is too small and too dense, and there's really just not a lot of what Israel wants in Gaza. So once again, they're more than happy to allow Gaza to basically be the open-air prison. Israel wants the West Bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, we can go to the one-state or binational solution. Now, I think people kind of use these interchangeably, but I don't think they're technically the same. But I have seen a lot of people just use them interchangeably. So obviously the idea of a one-state is a single state in Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, with obviously on paper, the perfect outcome would be all inhabitants of the three territories will have citizenship and equal rights without regard to ethnicity or religion. Some people say that's impossible, but that's the idea. Some Israelis do advocate another version of the one-state solution. That's kind of what Nick was talking about, where Israel will just annex the West Bank, but not the Gaza Strip. Because what you said, it's very dense. But a lot of people say that they also don't need to include it due to its self-governing status. So it kind of I feel like it's kind of just like a fancy way to just say we just want the West Bank to be terrified Gaza.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, I think this solution has been gaining more traction just with, a lot of people are now becoming very pessimistic to the two-state solution because there have been many talks and many, negotiations happening with, no dice. And so, so there's the interest growing each time the two-state approach fails. So obviously there's different points of view when it comes to this. On one hand, you have Israel. A lot of Israelis will lose, or Israel will lose its character as a Jewish state, and Palestine will fail to achieve national independence as their own state. But you have a lot of people who say that this is either the best, the most just, or the only way to resolve this conflict. And then, just to reiterate again, as more expansion happens in the West Bank, this is seeming like, to a lot of people, again, I honestly don't know where I stand between the one state and two state, if I'm going to be honest. Just in terms of, reality, I would love if they both could have their own state and they both could exist peacefully, but when it comes to, what will actually work, I honestly don't know. And so that's kind of the whole one state thing. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
So the one state, I think, is the best of all worlds because it really solves a lot of the problem of the three-state solution where you have now foreign states taking on subjects that have really no affiliation with them. I mean, really no relation with them, and it would be an incredible burden and expense to develop these regions and get them back on solid ground. And add on top of the fact that these have been militant, unstable areas for decades. But the one-state solution isn't going to work for the fascists because we're letting the undesirables become citizens. And that's, once again, the pessimistic reality of it. But, I mean, in reality, it's the best solution for Israel, and it's the best solution for the Palestinians. Because then what will happen is that the same kind of market forces that kind of do the same thing here, but not murdering people as a result of it, would basically force the Palestinians out of the areas that the Israelis want. But instead of them being basically, peoples that are not citizens, there'll at least be eminent domain. The Palestinian government and other institutions will actually have to pay the Palestinians to move. And the Palestinians will be able to move around Israel, and that's the thing. The Palestinians will move from the West Bank and will spread across Israel. And if you're a fascist or just racist, that's very scary.
Yeah.
And so, this once again is the best of all worlds, because then the Palestinians will have the citizenship and they'll be able to elect people and send representatives to the government of Israel, and kind of force Tel Aviv to, back off on a lot of its policies. But the problem is that, once again, those political factions, we don't really know what they're going to be. There's a lot of outside organizations and jihadist organizations, and this is where the legacy of Hamas comes into play, because, Hamas really sucks because of this. Because it's basically the opposite coin of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud, because they're just anti-Semitic. They see Jewish people as their enemies, and unfortunately, they are the only institution in these areas that have any kind of functional political infrastructure. So you're more likely to see Hamas get elected to the Israeli government, maybe in a different name, or they maybe will try to soften their perspectives. And let's also add on top of the fact that the Palestinians, I believe, population-wise, either are near 50% of the entire population of the region, what would be Israel, or a little bit over. So that could potentially lead to the Israelis being out of power if the Palestinians become one bloc.
They would be a minority.
And
in this one state.
In the one state. So that's a lot of the issues. Another issue that could be used to resolve this, though, is federalization. If the Israeli government divides up into territories of representatives, so that there's like a Senate or an upper chamber that is made up of representatives by territory, and this will kind of balance things out, so that you don't have just majority rule when it comes to the legislature. But I mean, it's a complicated situation.
It definitely is. It just sounds like the two-state solution is just becoming less and less and less viable as well, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Just as like groups integrate more together, it's just harder to separate at that point. So I almost feel that we really just have to look at a one-state now. And so it's how is the best way to like roll that out?
Well, one way of doing it is once again the federalization. So let's say the West Bank basically becomes a federal state. This will allow local government or home rule, if you will. But it would also mean that the West Bank government would have to crack down on the terrorist infrastructure, because the terrorist infrastructure is self-defeating at that point, because the government now that they're shooting at is technically your government. I honestly think that that's probably the best solution, is the West Bank being federalized into Israel and allowing home rule. This will piss off the interests of the Israeli corporate sector and the settlementers and the colonialists, or the ultra far right neo-Zionists. But it would definitely resolve a lot of the issues, and more importantly, that would probably be a benefit to the IDF as well, because now the IDF is working in partnership with the West Bank government to crack down on Hamas. And the Palestinian government that does exist in the West Bank doesn't like Hamas for obvious reasons.
Yeah, can't say I blame them there, but
they'll be able to conscript more people into their army. So,
well, there's got to be a they there, and they got to see the biggest problem is Israel in this situation. It's not Palestine. I think the Palestinians would probably be more than happy to be at least somewhat represented in the area that they live in, and having home rule will give them at least some level of identity and autonomy, so they can begin developing and stabilizing. The issue is Israel. They have the power. They have the interests. They're the ones with the big guns.
Say just solely just on the fact that they have the power, and it's kind of going to be on them to change the situation.
There's no solution without Israel working with the Palestinians. It's not the other way around. The Palestinians really don't have that much power. They don't have that much clout. Maybe 50 years ago they did, and it's just because of sheer population. But they don't. Like right now, these are people that are put in a open-air prison. And let's really be honest, West Bank is just a huge reservation.
Yeah.
So we really need to, as a community, as leftists, address this at where we are right now and call it out for what it is.
That actually leads up to a question I wanted to pose to you guys as well. How does the left, and then, like, not even potentially win, but get a bigger foothold in Israel as well? It's possible.
I think that right now, like, the left that exists in Israel is going to look more like Republicans here. Right centrists are in fact reactionaries, and the far right in Israel are just fascists. So one of the things the left needs to do is it needs to be a viable voice for economic and social justice. And right now the left in Israel is divided into various different factions on these issues, kind of like we are here in the States. So you have your tankies, you have your Orthodox socialists, and then you have the Labor Party of Israel, which was the dominant political faction until, surprise, surprise, Third Way came along and pretty much delegitimized Israel's Labor Party. So, and this has been the genius of the Netanyahu administration and the Likud, is they have adopted Tory democracy, which is basically the idea of being in support of a welfare state while still holding really strong socially conservative, if not reactionary, social positions. So welfare for us, but no welfare for you would be a good way of thinking about it. So that's basically right now. I would say that the left just needs to get its act together and realize that a communist state is not going to happen in Israel anytime soon.
Oh, there's no way that'll happen. I'm more asking how the left start gaining a bigger foothold. I don't think a communist state is just not possible there right now.
It's more difficult in Israel because it's a unitary state. So there's only one government, and that's the national government. You have local governments and local councils, but I mean, there's just one big government. And the Likud and the far-right blue-white alliance that exists right now is pretty dominant. The left, what the left of Israel needs to become is an alternative voice, but it's difficult for it to do so because of how polarizing the issue of Arab citizenship, and let's be honest, Marxists and socialists are not interested in being racist. So, and the Israeli public, I think, is just really racist right now against the Arab population and basically non-Israelis. Because, I mean, we forget that there's a lot of Palestinian Christians that are getting killed in these drone strikes. It's not just Muslims. Palestinians in general and Arabs, quote-unquote, in general, are the enemy in the mindset of Israel. And this gets into, like, the hegemony problem of the cultural identification that's happening in Israel. And it's really hard for the left in Israel to kind of address the issue, because just saying that, the bourgeois, oppressors are taking over the proletariat is just not, it's not relevant to the people of Israel. Like, there's no proletariat in the same sense. And so it's kind of the same issue that the left here has in the States, is that we really need to form a collective identity, and that will require some compromises, and it's just not seeming to happen. Like, right now, I think the left in Israel could give a good fight against the far right. It's just not organized. It doesn't have a coherent message. It doesn't have a coherent statement. There's no end goal. There's no great policy. If they were smart, one-state solution, and just vehemently attacking Benjamin Netanyahu's failures and the failures of the far right to resolve any issues, could possibly work. But once again, the racism and xenophobia of the Israeli public right now is really palpable. So once again, it'd be kind of interesting to see where the polling goes from here after the AP office was hit and after the ceasefire was broken.
But yeah, I think that's actually the biggest, the most important thing, is that numbers we can track, basically. So I really would like to see a lot more polling data done, just so we can see kind of what's effective to stop this as well. I think that would help a lot.
Well, this gets into kind of my subject of Gromsky and hegemony. So, Gromsky was a post-Marxist or a neo-Marxist. He really wanted to take Marxism to a different level of analysis. And a lot of it was due to the fact that the grand revolution that was supposed to take place once the capitalist state came into failure never really took place. And he began to analyze the cultural and psychological, or what we call sociological, causes of this. And so he came up with the concept of hegemony, which is basically the elite of society, or the ruling groups of society, really don't need to do through force or coercion to get you to agree with their ideology. They just need to normalize it. And so in what he saw in Italy, particularly in his time, he was a red-hot, radical socialist, communist in Italy, just as Benito Mussolini is seizing power. And Gromsky would eventually be arrested, I believe, in 1926 or 1927, and would spend the rest of his life in prison until he was disappeared in 1937. And there's a collection of his notes in prison where he basically analyzes these things over time. And he talks a lot about how the cultural hegemony in Italy underneath Benito Mussolini really wasn't that radically different initially than where it would eventually go. And he points out that the hegemony of society, hegemony being a sociological as well as a psychological perspective, could be enforced over time by the ruling elite or by the ruling powers that be. And so we've seen this in the States. We've seen this in Israel. Back in the 1940s, the United States was more left-wing when it came to economic issues.
Yeah.
Sociological issues, on the other hand, were still pretty conservative. When it came to women, when it came to people of color, when it came to people of different religions. World War II, particularly the arrival of the concentration camps in the broad understanding from the United States, changed a lot of people's perspectives on these issues. It's not surprising that after World War II, the Civil Rights Movement and various other civil liberties and civil rights organizations began to rise in the United States. And it was largely due to the fact that the horrors of fascism haunted the imagination of many people in the United States and in Europe in general after World War II.
Well, yeah, because you can see the aftermath of everything.
It's right there. And it's really important to note that a lot of people from the concentration camps would not remain in Germany. They would migrate to France, to Britain, and to the United States. But the one thing I will say that the Roosevelt and Truman administration did is they didn't sugarcoat the Holocaust. And so what's really interesting, and it's really important to note, is that this is a part of hegemony. So Gramsci didn't see hegemony as a bad thing. He saw it as just a natural reality. And what his argument was is that the left, or the working class, or whatever we want to call ourselves, needed to do was constantly and permanently fight ideas with ideas. The reason why hegemony can become so monolithic or hegemonic in society, and if you allow the petty bourgeois or the elites of society to control the hegemony, then you'll naturally, politically, economically, and sociologically see them as dominant, meaning that their ideas are unchallenged. A good way of understanding this is that from basically the late 1970s on, the left in the United States was a periphery. It still is to some degree a periphery phenomenon. And a lot of this is due to the fact that the battle of ideas ended. So under the Carter administration, the left kind of went to sleep. And the new right entered the arena. And so for the last 30 years, or for the last 40 years, the new right, which is now the Republican Party here in the States, but also the Tory Party in Great Britain, the National Front and Conservatives in France, the Christian Conservatives in Germany, and Likud in Israel, as well as the Liberal Democrats in Japan. I mean, these are all right-wing or center-right parties, have been able to dictate the hegemony. How we look at our economy, how we look at our society, how we look at ourselves, how we analyze ourselves, how we interact with, and how our relations are formed, how we perceive our relationships, what are our cultural values, what are our norms, are all being dictated by this organization. And this is the key problem that we're facing right now, and this is the key problem that the left in Israel is facing right now as well. Here in the United States, fortunately, we actually have a viable a viable secondary party, and that's the Democratic Party. And as much as leftists hate the Democratic Party, they're the only institution of power that we have. Mm-hmm. There's no third party that's viable. The Democratic Party also has, if you've noticed, over the last couple of years, been moving to the left on serious issues. Why? Well, it's because of hegemony. Bernie Sanders, in his 2016 campaign, awoke the left in the country. We
brought it back into light.
We are more communicative. We're communicating way more. We're trying to make an online presence. But more importantly, and this is what Gramsci would say, we're throwing ideas and arguments out into the ether. We're actually challenging the norms. And that is really important. And challenging those norms, just being able to challenge them and saying, no, there's other ideas out there. There are other forms of policies and solutions. And normalizing it and making it to where it's believable and real is a huge step forward. This is one of the reasons why, affordable college for everyone. Well, it costs the United States government, $70 billion a year to send everybody to school. That's a drop in the bucket in comparison to tax cuts and other things we've given to rich billionaires in this country.
Well, I think it also really prioritizes education again, which is something the right wing has really been opposed to. Mm-hmm. So I think it's doubly important just because they have such a mindset on kind of crushing a lot of education systems.
This is also, I think, one of the reasons why Joe Biden is popular right now. This is by far away one of the most contested elections in American history, and the guy has, a 67% approval rating?
Mm-hmm.
So,
it's really got up and up.
So around 2/3 of the country is supportive of him. That's pretty good. And especially after such a contentious election. And so what the left needs to do is show that not only is the state capable of doing things, but the state is able to do things that the market can't. And so one of the things that I think what I want to do with the show is proselytize this idea of market socialism, social democracy, that the state and markets have their place in our society, but they shouldn't be dictated or controlled by the right or by an orthodoxy. Because this orthodoxy of thought has basically ruined the lives of millions of people without any real consequence taking place. I mean, from the recession that we saw in 2008 to the issues that we're dealing with right now, I mean, a lot of these issues could have been resolved had the state taken on more of a responsible role in stabilizing our society.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting because you always hear about, communism has killed so many people, or socialism has killed X amount of people, but we don't really talk about how many people have been killed by capitalism as well. Just unfettered capitalism has crushed people routinely for it. So I think you have your places for different ideas, but we need to regulate, basically.
And some of the things that we need to do as leftists is own China and the Soviet Union. I hear this argument a lot in left-wing circles of communism never really was truly tried. I don't think that's a selling argument. I mean, theoretically speaking, no, it has never been tried. But practically speaking, when the ruling government and the ruling ideology of a government is calling itself communist, you can't walk away from that by saying, well, technically speaking.
Technically, they weren't actually that.
And so what we need to do is own the bad. Yes, Stalin was a fascist. He was a nut. He was an authoritarian brute. But we can also say the same thing about the British state. I mean, what is really interesting to me is seeing the similarities between, say, the Soviet Union and its activities and the British government and its activities when it came to empire. The Holodomor in Ukraine has more in common with the failures of governance in India than it does the Holocaust. And it's government oversight, failures, and just sheer apathy for the plight of the people in the region. There's socio-economic reasons for this happening, but I think it's pretty clear that empires are empires, and imperial thought, once again, the hegemony, is designed to rationalize the actions of the state. So, the hegemony of the Soviet Union as well as the hegemony of the British Empire rationalized the behavior and the total loss of life that followed as being necessary for the betterment of society or the state or whatever higher, power or higher goal that they're trying to go for.
I agree. I just think totalitarianism in itself is bad.
Well, I mean, totalitarianism is just a form of monarchy. So, I mean, let's really be honest. The Soviet Union never was democratic. It was oligarchic to monarchic, depending on who was in power and their relations with the various power brokers at the time. And unfortunately, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, instead of actually investing in the West, actually investing in institutions in Russia and the former Soviet states that would allow them to grow as democracies, we instead decided to go along with the oligarchs and the former Soviet, bureaucrats to rape and pillage these regions, to a point where basically now fascists are in charge of these regions. Either petty authoritarians or fascists. Really, take your pick, I guess. But this also is answered in hegemony, right? So this is not an end-all, be-all solution. Like, I don't agree with everything Antonio Gramsci had to say. But I do think it's an interesting window into how the left in this country can strategically begin to form itself and really begin to become a power block in our political system so that we can actually see policies that we want to see done. But unfortunately, that's going to require the evil E word in some circles, and that's called electoralism. So you guys want to talk about electoralism? Because I think it's a really important thing. It kind of ties into everything here.
Yeah, please go off.
So, if Donald Trump were president right now, I have no doubt that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government would never have done a ceasefire. I'm pretty sure things would have escalated and more violence would have been perpetrated, and Trump and company would have probably either, at best, just said, hey, it's justified, at worst, would have called for them to go even further.
We see a lot more far-right activity here in the States as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. General, just contentious time.
Well, I mean, it gets into don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So this was a square that I always had a really time fitting through this was a square peg that I always had a difficult time fitting through the circle hole until I realized it's not about compromising your beliefs. It's about understanding that there is a practicality and how far you're able to push certain institutions. So the left in this country really does not have any institutional support. This is why electoralism is important. The left didn't have its own institution in the 1940s either, other than the unions, which were powerful, but that was the only one. We didn't have newspapers. We didn't have the banks. We didn't have Wall Street. We didn't have government. So these trade unions, as well as the left, allied themselves with the Democratic Party. And all of a sudden, more institutions were open to left-wing voices and left-wing thought, to the point where by the time the New Deal was said and done with, the Democratic Party had a really strong left-wing contingency inside of it. So, electoralism, at least in the West, in places like America, Europe, and Japan, is the only real pathway forward that we got. There's no revolution that's going to happen. If you think there is, you're an idiot. I'm not going to mince my words. An AR-15 and some pipe bombs are nothing in comparison to predatory drones, the M1 Abrams tanks, the Bradley troop vehicles, and a trained military and National Guard. More importantly, it works against our interests. The reality is, I don't want to see anybody get killed. I'm not interested in guillotining anybody. It's stupid. Let's really be blunt. It's stupid. When you're openly advocating chopping off the heads of the rich, you clearly don't understand the history of the French Revolution and how that went haywire. But you're also basically shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I was going to say it radicalizes the movement more too. We're going to get less of a following. We're going to have less support in the long run.
I have no problem saying eat the rich.
Yeah.
But when you're openly standing the guillotine and not really even understanding that that's not really a symbol of liberation, it's more of a symbol of terror and oppression, you kind of miss the plot. And so, like, in all honesty, like, I look at the New Deal, the civil rights movement as, particularly underneath Martin Luther King and the various other activists of the 50s and 60s, as my inspiration of what we were able to do here in the States. Because I actually think that the United States people have become less racist and less sexist over time, and honestly want to see their fellow Americans do better off. Even despite my cynicism, I think that the election in 2020, this most recent one, was a referendum on the bullshit that the far right and the reactionary elements in our society have been pressing for some time. I mean, Donald Trump got more votes than any other American president in American history, except for Joe Biden, who got around 4 to 3 million more votes, depending on how you count it. And that's a referendum. I think people are tired of it. I think people are tired of us versus them. I think people just want solutions. And I'm hoping that this is beginning to happen across the world. That the outrage and anger and frustration and fury is now going to actually be directed towards more effective goals and effective causes. It's our job to kind of shepherd people to goals and causes that we think are solutions.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think electoralism, like for some people, it's slow. It's a slower process, and so I think for a lot of like really like those revolutionary types, they don't like that. They don't like it because it's not immediate changes and whatnot, but it's effective.
Well, they're juvenile. They're children. I mean, let's really be honest. Anybody who wants to go around LARPing as a revolutionary online kind of tells you where they are mentally. I mean, like, it's one thing for Bernie Sanders saying we are the revolution, but I mean, it's still electoralism. It's revolutionary inside the electoral system. So you can still be, like, you can still want to revolutionize political movements, political causes, and elements inside political parties. I'm all for that. But the idea that as an external polity, if you try to become a separate militant institution in the United States, you are going to be designated as a terrorist group and you are going to be persecuted. Especially since most of the media sees you as the enemy to begin with. They have no incentive. They have no incentive to see you as an ally or as a friend. This gets to my next point, and that is anger, or Angrynomics. So Angrynomics is a book that was written by Mark Blyth. He's a post-Keynesian, I believe, economist from Brown. I don't know how he describes himself. He's a political economist. So, and he kind of sounds like a Keynesian, so he's pretty base. And he and a man named Mark Lundgren, who's an Irishman. So this is a Scotsman and an Irishman writing a book. So, you know, based.
Yeah, very base takes there.
Wrote a book called Angrynomics, and it's a pretty interesting dive into what he considers to be legitimate outcries and frustrations versus interpersonal anger and prejudice, and how those actually shape and form the political moments that we are in right now. So, I would advise everybody here listening and people who are here to go to Audible and download it. You'll have Mark Blyth and Mark Lundgren actually discuss this themselves. It's a great book. I would advise anybody to read it. Another book by Mark Blyth that I think is really great is Austerity, A History of a Dangerous Idea. So it's both are really important, and this actually feeds into Angrynomics. So, what did the Italian, German, French, British, American, and Japanese government all do before the rise of the alt-right and fascist organizations in their countries recently?
They all do. I'm not sure.
Tell us.
They all adopted austerity right as a recession hit. Now, can you guys tell me why that's a bad idea?
Well, I mean, you're getting hit by a recession, you're losing money, and now you're cutting off all other sources.
So you're getting hit twice, right? If you are not part of the ultra-rich, you're getting hit twice, some way, somehow. Whether your kid's education is now being decreased, your streets become shittier, you now have to pay more in taxes locally to pay for things that you used to not have to pay for because of austerity measures. So it's taking a double hit. Now, why do you think the far right was able to successfully... What was that?
I said it's taking a bad situation and then compounding it.
So why do you think the far right was able to successfully galvanize support because of this?
Run that by me one more time.
Why do you think the far right was able to successfully galvanize support from this? They were able to succeed. I mean, the National Front in France, which was a nothing party in 2008, became the second largest political bloc by 2018. That's pretty bad. Italy has two fascist parties right now that are like very close to winning a majority. Fortunately, they just hate each other. Hungary is fascist. Germany now has the alternative for Deutschland, so Germany is dealing with fascism again. And this is a country that has spent literal decades trying to say how bad fascism is.
Trying to eradicate it from their country, too. Yeah.
And now there's a political party that is basically fascist, that is fairly popular. Poland is dealing with fascism. So fascism's on the rise in Europe. And we had our own little alt-right, party for the last 4 years with Donald Trump and company. So why do you think they were successful?
I'm not sure. If I were to hazard a guess, though, a lot of it is they almost created like an us versus like them mentality within their voting base. Where it was like they fit into, you're not the problem, but X amount of people are.
So that's some of it. So immigrants were, of course, targeted. And the fact that many immigrants to these regions have, historically speaking, at least for the last 50 years, been from the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And there's history for that. It's not just because these are, people trying to invade. It's that companies forever are going to try to lower the cost of production by bringing in poorer people who are willing to work lower wages to work in their companies. But a lot of it is the fact that there was no message from the left. So I'm going to get into this in future videos. When the left is silent or non-existent, the right is going to win. And that's because the center is delusional. Being a centrist is a stupid position, because then all you're becoming is a contrarian. Centrism is not the equivalent of moderation, nor is it the equivalent of rationalization. It's just somebody who really doesn't want to engage in the nitty-gritty of politics, and so they hope by acting above the fray, they're able to avoid the issues. So let's think about it. The left-wing parties of Europe, were they left-wing?
Not really.
How about the United States?
I think so.
The last president from the Democratic Party before Barack Obama was Bill Clinton, and he was known for his third way and triangulation. And let's talk about Japan, the Social Democratic Party of Japan. Also centrist. The third way activism of the 1980s and the 1990s basically defanged the left in many of these countries, and the consequences of this were not felt immediately because these are sociological, these are socioeconomic. This takes time to actually form. But it's not surprising that these political parties, all of a sudden, that used to be pretty dominant, all of a sudden now were challenged from the right and were losing elections. This gets to hegemony, but this also gets to angronomics. So why is NAFTA despised in the United States? And let's really be honest, most people in this country really were not affected negatively by NAFTA. To be honest, most people in the country weren't. But it's such a boogeyman now. Well, one of it is the fact that a lot of people were affected by it. Not a majority, but enough people were affected by it negatively. And the right was able to weaponize it. And turn it into, see, this is what Democrats give you. They outsource your jobs to, these scary brown and black places, and you lose your working class way of life. So the far right basically just took the playbook that the right wing in the country in the United States has been using since Richard Nixon. And that is, we're actually the true friends and the true champions of the common people. Mm-hmm. We're not these crazy, academic Yankee types that are coming in and messing up the apple cart.
And earlier when I was saying like they created that us versus them mentality, that's actually more along the lines of what I meant. It wasn't even that it was like scary brown people, but it was that your government and these institutions around it are failing you, and they're not your ally.
Mm-hmm. And
so we're with you in this.
So you could see why that's a bit of a problem when you adopt austerity as a solution too, right? Because now your government's actually not doing anything for you, and is seemingly going out of its way to hurt you in a bad situation. I mean, let's think about it. Barack Obama came into office with hope and change. 2 years in, the Republican Party crushed the Democratic Party in congressional elections. What happened in those 2 years? Well, some things happened. We got healthcare reform, but it was a healthcare reform that really didn't solve people's issues. It forced you to get insurance, so even if you're unemployed, you're now going to have to pay a hefty tax if you don't get insurance. Mm-hmm. Now, they can try to sell, well, we have these new markets that we're creating for lower insurance, but that's more food out of your family's mouth to pay for something that you really can't afford to begin with. So that's not great. That seems to be a gift to the insurance companies. Now, it's better than what we had before, but was it really a solution to the problem, or was it just a Band-Aid?
It was definitely a Band-Aid, and arguably a very painful Band-Aid.
Then let's look at the Obama Relief Fund that we created in 2009. It was half of what we saw right here with Joe Biden and company actually talking about having even more spending happening. And most of that money went to projects that I don't think anybody, unless they actually were in the state, knew about. And I mean state government, not just the state itself. Utah received money from the federal government. Can you guys name a single project that was done?
Sure can't.
I mean, in Idaho, I had nothing. I couldn't name you a single thing. Yet billions of dollars were spent. So you kind of see how this is a bit of a problem. Not only did they spend money in ways that really weren't that, public, they didn't even lionize or champion it. And that's because there was no left-wing solution. Keynesianism was brought up and then tossed aside because, let's really be honest, Keynesianists don't exist anymore. We have a handful of post-Keynesianists, but Keynesianism as a theory of economics was delegitimized by the time of the 1990s. A lot of this was due to the fact that the hegemony of the Democratic Party and the left in the country, had moved away from it. To put it bluntly, the left-wing parties in Europe basically did a lot of things that antagonized and alienated key parts of their base from the mid-'80s on, and never believed something that happened in '08 could happen. And it did. And so they had no solutions. And so this allowed the far right in Europe and in the United States to basically bring out the same old talking points that they always had. But now people are scared, they're angry, they're frustrated, and it does feel like they're people that are actually out to get them.
Yeah.
You can't be paranoid if they're actually out to get you.
Yeah.
And really, another interesting point that I actually have to bring up, places that are the most anti-immigrant in Europe, as well as the United States, do you think they're places with a lot of immigrants?
I would say no.
No. East Germany is by far and away one of the most anti-immigrant places, and it has one of the smallest immigrant populations in Germany.
Yeah, I'm thinking like places like the Deep South, you're not really getting a whole lot of immigrants over there.
Mm-hmm. Like, there is, but they're migrant. They come and they go. Mm-hmm. Anti-immigrant sentiments, I mean, like, it's popular because of racism here in the States, but, I mean, even that's beginning to lose out. I mean, like, let's really be honest. The Trump campaign in 2020 ran one of the most anti-immigrant campaigns out there, and it really didn't get them anywhere. So, anything else you guys want to talk about?
I think that's it for me on this topic. I'm just glad that we were able to bring out not only the Israel-Palestine conflict, but we were able to tie it back into really how it pertains to us here in the States right now, because we have a lot of things going on over here as well that I think we could try and fix looking at what's happening over there.
Well, I would just say we have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Not done.
We're not done yet. But, I think we can... I'm optimistic in that I think we can begin to pull the country to the left.
I agree. I actually think the left right now is poised to do some good work if we use the energy that it has.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and aren't there polls coming out that more people now identify with the left?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that definitely gives me hope.
Well, it comes with the idea of the moral authority, or the cultural authority. So this gets back into hegemony. So the right lost its moral authority. Why? Because it seems like every single one of their representatives and their figureheads are either sleeping with underage people or just nutballs. Like your Matt Gaetz and your Marjorie Taylor Greens, because I'm not going to call her MTG. She doesn't deserve an abbreviation.
Yeah.
Not only do they say really stupid stuff, but these guys are just really disgusting people.
That is so true.
They really are.
And these are your moral authorities.
Yeah.
And this is something that the Bill Maher types don't quite comprehend. The issue isn't just that these are deplorable people. In general, Matt Gaetz is a disgusting piece of shit. Even before we found out that he had sex with a 17-year-old girl, he was a disgusting piece of shit before then for the policies he advocated for.
It just so happened he also had awful tastes.
So I think we're hopefully going to begin to see the end of Reaganism in the country and politics, and a lot of it is the fact that the Boomer generation, which basically lionized and created Reagan and Reaganism, is dying off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the people that are making up the political scene today were coming into age after Reagan was president. And so hopefully that's going to shift the political spectrum that exists in our country. But the biggest thing that we got to do is we got to make the left inviting.
Yes, that's the big thing right now is we have to just be like, hey, it's open to vast majorities of people here.
Exactly. And I see no issue with being internationalist as well as nationalist. Well, maybe not nationalist, but pro-American in some of our rhetoric. But not pro-American as into what the state is doing, but pro-American is what the citizenry is about. I think that a lot of leftists kind of get caught in this mindset that whenever we talk about the United States, we're just talking about the government. We need to talk about the people. The people in this country are less racist, are less sexist, are less bigoted than they were 40 years ago.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think we can build upon that and expand upon that by inviting people into our movement who would otherwise see us as just a bunch of crazies. So let us, as Goodfellas History, work together to further the cause.
Yeah.
Got any closing comments, guys?
I think that was an excellent closing comment right there.
Yeah, I think that was really good. Really well said.
Okay, guys. I will see you guys the next time we meet. You can follow us at Goodfellas History on YouTube and hit the like and subscribe button if you liked what you heard. You'll have a great day.